Hey guys, I'm Allie Kirshner. I'm one of the assistant sports performance coaches here at Kansas.
And I'm Luke Bradford, also one of the assistants here. And this session down here is going to be about how we approach our in-season training. So what's going to be going on is that these athletes are going to go through an actual in-season training session start to finish, other than they've already gone through their general warm-up. So starting right now, they're going to jump into their specific warm-up, starting right now. That was your cue. They're going to go through their specific warm-up, and they're just going to continue right on through for the next 20 minutes as we're going. We definitely want you guys to keep an eye on what they're doing and how they're moving through their session, but we're not going to be explaining everything as they go through it. This is just to serve as a typical example of an in-season program that many of our teams will go throughout the year. So we were both actually really excited about this session, mainly because we want to continue promoting the use of strength training in season. And over the last few years, as we've been going around and talking to other professionals through the country, we've gotten a very positive response when we talk about what we do with our in-season teams. So that kind of tells us that, even though we know there are other professionals using some similar philosophies and strategies as us, what we're doing is fairly unique and progressive. So as these athletes continue through their session, we're going to talk to you about what the goal is of our in-season model, what we believe are the benefits of our in-season training, and then also talk a little bit about some of our implementation strategies. But one thing I will mention, though, is just keep in mind what works for us may not work for you, and that's okay. But hopefully I think there's something that you can take out of the next 20 minutes here that you can take and adapt to your situation.
So like Luke said, we're going to dive right into our presentation today by identifying what the goal of in-season training truly is. And for us here at Kansas, at least, that's to win. Nothing we do as sports performance professionals can interfere with or get in the way of our athletes and coaches' goal of winning. So, everything we're going to do is going to help them in pursuit of that goal. Now, that being said, we believe that if implemented correctly, in-season training is actually instrumental in pursuit of winning. So we're going to talk about 3 benefits in particular as they pertain to in-season training and why we see in-season training as so beneficial for athletes. So the first benefit we're going to look at is its ability to help retain peak performance. The second benefit we're going to talk about is in-season training and how it can help reduce injury. And the third is, if implemented correctly, we believe in-season training can actually be a method of recovery in itself. So we'll dive right into that first benefit, retaining peak performance. At the very least, with our in-season training sessions, we want to hold on to the adaptations that we worked so hard to create in the off-season. But realistically, if we keep our frequency high in the weight room in season and our intensity relatively high as well, it's entirely possible that we can actually get better at some things in season. And that's the mindset we're trying to create with our athletes, that we're not just here to go through the motions and just kind of roll through it. We're trying to get something out of these sessions. Now, the next major benefit that we see is using in-season training as a way to help reduce injury. And simply put, stronger athletes are more resilient athletes. They're better able to handle the forces they encounter on a day-to-day basis, and they're better able to, they're better equipped to contract their musculature at optimal intensities. So, if that's the case, we're looking at a stronger, healthier athlete. Next, we know our athletes get a ton of repetitions in their sport, both on the practice field and in competition. So we want to take them, bring them into the weight room, and actually practice some movements or motions that are unsport specific, so that we kind of counteract some of the imbalances that they pick up throughout the season, or just help them work through some range of motion that they might not be getting within their sport. And then finally, but if they're in the weight room consistently in season, it becomes another place to collect data points in terms of how they're feeling, how they're moving around, how they're interacting with their teammates. And then we can give that information to coaches in terms of, their readiness and willingness to perform. And the third major benefit we see is, if implemented correctly, like I said, these sessions can be a way to actually help promote recovery processes, both metabolically and in terms of restoring proper joint alignment, mobility, just kind of getting the tires rotated and moving correctly. So it's pretty obvious that hypothetically there are some significant benefits to training in season. But we found, sorry, excuse the banging. We found that the only way that for us at KU to take advantage of these benefits is by training with high frequency and consistency in season. So frequency and consistency are the two major pillars of our in-season training philosophy. With frequency, which we'll talk about first, our teams, most if not all of our teams here at KU train between 3 to 6 times a week in season. And that might seem like a lot for some of you guys, but we'll kind of explain why we've adopted that methodology. There's some literature out there that shows that training 1 to 2 times a week in season might be enough to activate a strength stimulus. But there's also some research out there that shows that if you go from a high frequency off-season training program like we do, which is about 5 times a week, it might be actually more beneficial to cut the length of each session going into the in-season phase as opposed to the number of sessions. So we have kept the session short, 20 to 30 minutes, but we keep that frequency high 3 to 6 times a week. Now, what we see with that is that they don't accumulate as much fatigue within each session, so quality becomes even higher and the quantity is not as important. Now, frequency is very important, but ultimately consistency over the length of the season is the more important thing. So, week to week, we want to keep their practice of coming to the weight room the same. No matter if they have hard games, easy games, or traveling, whatnot, we want the practice of coming to the weight room to be part of their practice culture. It's part of their routine. It's a practice of stress inoculation or immersion. It's just a habit, it's part of what they do. And we believe if we can do that, then late in the season, when we are a little bit fatigued and we want to take them out of the weight room, we can cut it down to 1 to 2 sessions a week and still get that strength stimulus that we were talking about earlier.
All right, so if we think about a couple of things that Allie told us, number one, the goal of our in-season program is to win, and nothing that we do in here can interfere with training or competition, all right? But then she also said we train 3 to 6 days a week, so at first that seems a little bit contradictory, but there's things that we do specifically in order to manage that and make sure that they're ready to go. So to start, within our overall philosophy, we basically have 3 different types of training sessions. We have fatiguing sessions, recovering sessions, and stimulating sessions. Fatiguing sessions are exclusively reserved for the off-season when we want to fatigue the system. So we're going to challenge the metabolic thresholds and create some tissue damage, but the off-season is where that stops. Our in-season efforts are focused entirely on recovering sessions and stimulating sessions. All right, our recovering sessions are in the form of active recovery, and all we're trying to do is stimulate the restorative processes of the body that are already in place and going. In addition to some soft tissue work, and in particular myofascial release of the feet, we've adopted many different forms of mobility practice and stretching, and yes, we will even include some low-level strength training on these recovery days, but the focus on that is more about the quality of motion and patterning this skill rather than it is about force production. And we demand a very high level of skill with our athletes, so they have to stay engaged through this entire process, which means, as Allie kind of alluded to, the weight room truly is a function of their everyday experience here, even on an off day. The remainder of our sessions in season are stimulating sessions when we're just trying to potentiate motor unit recruitment and firing frequencies as much as we can without reaching the point of any neurological or physiological fatigue. And using our Elite Form system kind of actually helps us to monitor that because we can monitor speeds, and if things start slowing down, then we can easily kind of start to cut that session short. But if we get this stimulus right, the athletes should be leaving the weight room feeling better than when they walked in. All right, and that's one thing that our sport coaches will say. They've noticed over time that on days that our athletes lift before practice, they've noticed a difference in quality of their practice sessions. So now the majority of our teams will actually lift immediately before practice. Now you notice I said if we get it right. That's the big challenge because there's so many variables on a day-to-day basis that we have to take into consideration that could affect the things that we do in here from day to day or week to week. All right? But one thing that we always push for is high intensity in our training, okay? We feel like we can manipulate the loads and speeds in a way that can help to offset the nervous system and keep them fresh and ready to train and compete. But we are always going to push the high intensity. So over the course of several sessions or several weeks, we will end up traversing the entire force velocity curve. For us, it's not just about lifting light and fast or finding that theoretical load that's going to put us at peak power. We will go heavy on some days, maybe even if it's just once every couple of weeks, but we will go very heavy, 85% all the way up to like 95%. So that's pretty big for us. But sometimes what that creates also is a little bit of a challenge because the sport coaches, all right, they get a little nervous about lifting heavy and going with such high intensity in season because that's what they associate with fatigue and soreness. But it's not the intensity that'll get us, it's the volume that we have to make sure we manage in order to keep them fresh. So for our main lifts, we really will keep our sets at 5 reps or under, and the majority of our time is spent doing 1s, 2s, and 3s. All right, and our total volume can be as low as half of what it was in the off season, which is a huge factor in helping us manage fatigue and why we can train with such high frequency because it doesn't take very much to recover from a session like that, and we can come back in the next day and do it again. All right, so high intensity, low volume programming is where we've gotten a big payoff. One other variable that we pay particular attention to is exercise selection. Our Sparta system does help to guide some of that exercise selection. And there's a lot of other factors that play into that we just don't have time to discuss today in this 20 minutes. But I will just straight up tell you that with our staff, we tend to keep it very basic and very consistent. So there's not a lot of variation over the course of a competitive season in terms of the exercise selection. We feel like, again, we can better influence the nervous system by manipulating the loads and speeds based on what we need on that particular day or based on what's coming up in the next days to come. Okay, rather than worry about changing the exercises too frequently or adding new things in. So one of the kind of unofficial rules that we go by a little bit is if we didn't develop the skill in the off season, then maybe it doesn't belong in our in-season program.
So Luke talked about intensity, volume, and exercise selection as being 3 of the variables that we consider. But in reality, we take into consideration a lot more than that when we are, creating our weekly structure. But the way that we, manipulate these variables in season is using an unplanned nonlinear structure. And that really allows us to adapt, adjust on the fly, because you know what, in season, we never know what's going to happen. Wins, losses, fatigue, all those kind of things are unpredictable. So we want to be able to make changes when we need to. That being said, we do kind of want to give you guys an example of how we would approach programming for a team in season. So we'll give you an example of our volleyball team who play, let's say this is a normal week and we play Wednesday and Saturday with Sunday as our off day. And I'm going to put normal in quotation marks. But we would approach that week maybe by coming in to the weight room on Monday and hitting more of a strength stimulus with some higher loads in their main lifts. Tuesday, we might come back in and go more towards the high velocity end of the spectrum with some Olympic variations or explosive med ball work so that we're primed and ready to play on Wednesday. Thursday, we might come back in and do more of a pure recovering session like Luke talked about, where we're doing some mobility, some myofascial release of the feet, so that, especially if we picked up some fatigue, say it was a 5-set match or whatnot, we're feeling good. Friday, we come back in and again, maybe hit some more high velocity stuff or some repeated power work. That'll make us feel good again for Saturday, and then we're off on Sunday. But again, I put normal in quotation marks because as coaches, we know there's no such thing as a normal week. We might be traveling, so we're not getting in all of those sessions, or we might have a bye on Wednesday, so we can actually do a little bit more in the weight room. Whatever that is, that nonlinear, unplanned structure really helps us to adapt. So, kind of summarizing our whole presentation here, we can kind of go back to what the goal or what our why is of in-season training, and that's ultimately to win. So as sports performance coaches, that might look like a lot of different things. That could be traversing the force velocity spectrum, that could be promoting recovery practices, that could be monitoring fatigue. But the way that we're most successful in doing that is by keeping frequency and consistency high, 3 to 6 times a week, all season long. And then within those frequent, consistent sessions, we want to keep the volume low and the intensity high, both mentally and physically. If we can do that, we truly believe that we'll be successful no matter what our in-season program tends to look like. So actually, we are a little bit ahead of schedule. First of all, as these guys are finishing up, can we give a round of applause for our athletes? So as we were talking, that was about 15 minutes. They went through, these guys are wrapping up almost an entire session. We would then send them off to practice, and they'd be ready to go. Do you guys have any questions now that we've got some time about either philosophy, implementation strategies, whatnot? Yeah, what's up? Oh, sorry.
I noticed they all have lifting shoes on. You make them wear those?
So we're lucky enough here at Kansas to provide lifting shoes for all of our athletes, and we truly believe that it's a big help in terms of, one, just keeping them in a better position biomechanically when they squat and when they do stuff on the platform. So yeah, we do have them wear lifting shoes anytime that we're doing stuff on the platform, especially. Do you want to?
What was that transition like from your previous approach to going to more of this higher frequency type model? What was the messaging like to the players? What were the things that you struggled with as staff? Or, was it pretty unanimous that it was clear that this was the way you needed to go?
It definitely took some time to make that transition. We didn't just go from 2 days a week training to suddenly going 5 days a week. That's definitely some of the sport coaches were a little nervous about it, but honestly, I think our athletes were probably our biggest advocates in that. I think most of them would tell you they would probably rather come down here and go through a 25 to 30 minute lift than to go through a 15-minute dynamic warm-up in the gym. So truly, I think our athletes were the biggest advocates of that in talking to the coaches. And when reality hit and the coaches started seeing that difference in practice, it becomes very obvious, like wow, our practice sessions are better. Why don't we keep doing this? So it did take some time. It just didn't happen overnight. I think probably anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 years, depending on the team. We have had a couple of teams that made it a pretty abrupt change from one season to the next, but in general, it did take a little bit of time. Yeah.
What's the time differential between their training session and practice?
Well, again, here where we're lucky enough that everything is in this one building, at least for these sports. For volleyball, it's basically they finish their lift and they walk down the hallway and practice will start 15 minutes later. For these guys, basically the same thing.
Would your in-season philosophy change at all if they were required to be here at 7:30 and then not practice until 3?
Yeah, to some degree, but not to that extent. Our teams that train in the morning and then practice in the afternoon, we may do things a little bit differently, but not really a whole lot, because it still comes back to we're not looking to induce fatigue. We're not looking to really challenge them. It's that same stimulus. And if they come back, I think as long as there's somewhere 5 to 6 hours between the lift session and practice session, they'll be fine. Yeah. Do we have time, Dave? One more question?
So your workouts during the season versus off the season, your volume would be less or more during the season? I feel like during the summer, like right now, you focus like the summer on the strength, getting stronger. When the season starts, you back it off a little bit.
Absolutely. So yeah, the off season is the time where we can push volume and induce fatigue, like Luke talked about. But in season, really what causes fatigue and soreness is volume. So we want to keep the intensity high, but keep the volume a lot lower than in the off season.